Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod. We have Leigh Collier with us. She is co-founder at 411 Data and also founder at Through the Noise Coaching, TTN coaching. So we're going to talk about coaching. We're going to talk about data, everything in between. This podcast is brought to you by podbuyer.com. If you want to start, scale, be invited to a podcast. Podcasts are quite good to learn, to meet new people, to get smarter, grow your network and your net worth, because you can get leads and clients from podcasting too. So podbuyer.com, that is my podcast agency if you need help with that. Leigh, welcome to the pod. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and about your companies?
Yeah, thank you for having me. As an introduction, I am someone who is a multi-passionate person. So I have a lot of interests, a lot of different ways I like to spend my time and juggle between the two. And I've recently, only this year actually, taken a trip into entrepreneurship as a way to enable that to happen. So a few of the labels that I carry with myself, I'm a data scientist, and that's part of what I do at 411 Data. Which we are a semi-stealth mode company who are building out a data platform for alternative data to basically solve a lot of the problems that are going on in the world of data right now. In addition to that, I'm also a leadership coach. So as part of Through the Noise coaching, I like to call them great thinkers. And these are people who think a little bit differently to every day, and they often are someone who is a neurodivergent in some way, so someone who has something like ADHD or autism or any of the umbrella terms that come under neurodivergent, whether diagnosed or not, or maybe just someone who thinks in an interesting way. And so what I do in that business is I work with leaders and entrepreneurs to grow their careers, grow their business, and build up to be the best person that they want to be for enabling their careers. On top of that, I'm a fitness enthusiast. I'm a musician, and I try and juggle having a social life and spending time with my family around all of those amazing projects. So that's my very quick, this is who I am moment there.
Yeah, and you spend a good amount of your career at Bank of America, Merrill, Lynch. So tell us how that experience shaped you and probably gave you a nice cash cushion to start your own businesses today.
Yeah, definitely. So I've always been really big into saving money. I've always needed a big rainy day fund for if something goes wrong. So I've always put away a lot of money with the goal of moving on to something else long term. I just didn't know when that would be. So I really enjoyed starting my career somewhere where there's a lot of support for people who are just starting out, somewhere where there's a lot of great people to learn from. I worked as a quant when I was there, so that's a lot of mathematical modeling for the finance industry. And really learned a lot about leadership, about modeling. I mean, I have a background in maths and a master's degree in financial maths, so I had a strong basis of the theoretical component, but it's different when you're going into the real world and actually applying it in real life on a day-to-day basis. And I learned a lot about networking as well, and all those soft skills that are kind of undervalued a lot in technical roles. So for me, it was a really good place for me to build out my career and do a lot of learning. And I came to the point where I just wanted to do something a bit different. And for me personally, it's very hard to just have one full-time job when I have all of these projects that I want to work on. And that's kind of why the shift happened in my world.
Right. And how do you juggle with that? Do you split your days? Are you great at time management, or is it just that you have some kind of ADHD brain like myself and you thrive on noise and chaos?
I absolutely have an ADHD brain as well. I'm very recently diagnosed, and everything has fallen into place as a result of that. So I tend to have a semi-structure, but I also tend to follow my brain, and I try and do a bit of both. So I have days that I tend to dedicate to the data startup, and I have days that I dedicate to coaching. But within that, it really depends if there's priorities, if there's a deadline. ADHD brains thrive on deadlines. So I'm absolutely all about getting things done if there's a deadline. If something's a little bit more free form, then I'll follow my brain and see where it needs to go, what feels good today, what's important today, and enjoying the chaos up until the point where the chaos is too much and we need to rein it back in a little bit.
So neurodivergence, what do you have to say about that and how it may help for me, for example, to speak with a bunch of diverse brains on this podcast and learn that their lens are somewhat different than mine?
Yeah, I mean that's an absolute great open-ended question. So, as I said earlier, neurodivergence refers to people who think a little bit differently, and we diversity has been a big thing for a long time because there's lots of things of diversity of experience. There's lots of things people with different backgrounds, different educations bring to the table. In with neurodivergence, this is very much a diversity in how our brains work, and so we are able to see things in different ways. We're also, all of us, different in the sense that there are a number of different forms of neurodivergence. I mentioned a few earlier, like ADHD and autism are the most common ones that people know about, but dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, Tourette syndrome, all of these kind of come under the wide banner of neurodivergence. And all of these think a little bit differently. Their brains are wired in different ways. And even within one category, I'm sure that if you and I both may have ADHD brains, but I'm sure our ADHD presents in a different way. And so there might be ways that we think alike, and there might be ways that we think very differently. And so by allowing for this difference in thinking, you're allowing for so much more creativity, so many more viewpoints, and allow us to spot our blind spots or things we might not have considered previously, and just open up. All companies are big on innovation, right? We hear this all the time. Everyone wants to innovate. Everyone wants to know what the next big thing is. But if everyone's thinking the same way, how are you going to get that out of the box idea that's going to open up to new innovations?
How would you define? Well, one thing, I think I told you that lately with all of these podcasts, I've developed a mild dyslexia, I think it's called, and which is very odd. For example, I was denoting an example yesterday of my brain being like, oh, there's 356 days a year, while there's 365. And sometimes I invert stuff. I think it's a symptom of tiredness and not sleeping that well. What do you attribute that to? Is that even possible to develop mild dyslexia and mild amnesia of like my brain forgetting about people? If I interview 15 CEOs a day, is that a normal thing?
If it's normal to you, then it's normal to you. And then my other point there would be, why are we worried about what's normal or not? But I understand there is a point of we care about our health and our mental wellness and all that kind of stuff. So with any kind of neurodivergence, there are symptoms of neurodivergence that seem very quote unquote normal, in the sense that people who are neurotypical can have these symptoms. And a really good example I like to give is I'm always putting my phone down, walking away from it, and then not finding my phone. And quite often I get, oh yeah, everyone does that. That's a normal part of the human condition. And it's true, it is a normal part of the human condition. But when it becomes something that you should look into maybe getting a diagnosis for or treatment for, is when that is getting in the way of your day-to-day life. So when people lose their phone, yeah, it's annoying if you lose your phone once a week. If you lose your phone multiple times a day, that's a whole nother level of this is something that I'm now finding a serious challenge. It's now interfering with my daily life. So it becomes a question of, is this something that is caused by something else? So could it be that you're just a bit burnt out and you're a bit tired, and maybe you need a couple of days where you're not interviewing 15 CEOs a day? Maybe you take a couple of days where you only interview 2 CEOs a day, and maybe that helps. Or maybe it doesn't, and maybe this is something that's much more long term, and then maybe this is actually symptoms are exaggerated now because you're in a state where you're super busy and maybe a bit burnt out, but maybe it was there all along. And so it becomes a question of, is this something that I feel like I need help with because it's getting in the way of my daily life, or is this something that I can manage in other ways? And that's kind of a personal decision that you come to there.
I talk also with a lot of CEOs. I mean, some of them don't show up with their true personalities on these pods, but on my mastermind, they tend to be quite themselves. And I note in the best CEOs, the ones that tend to accomplish the most, that is a mild form of autism, whatever that means. And we've bastardized many words in the last years: depression, ADHD, autism. So what's your definition of it? Because I'm also noticing that in me, and the fact that I'm really disconnected in some situations on purpose. Most of the time I've trained myself to be that way, to really be absorbed, right? So yes, I have an ADHD brain, but I trained it to be super focused and ignore a bunch of things that a lot of people would find crazy to ignore. You know, for example, I don't answer my phone. As soon as I see adversity, my brain shuts down, you know, and I completely ignore the person. I can literally do that, not just saying that I ignore them, but like very much ignore and not listen to them. I also zone out when I'm in a meeting with someone that is not saying anything good for my brain, mostly on purpose. So, what's the definition of autism, and do you feel that it also makes for very productive human beings?
So autism is a spectrum. So there's kind of not one definition of this is autism. There are a collection of symptoms on a spectrum. And then depending on where you lie on this spectrum and how your symptoms show themselves kind of depends on where you get a diagnosis. So some things that are on that list could be things like sensory challenges. So you may find too much noise overstimulating, or you may seek out stimulation and not be able to cope with silence. There's also things like social communications. So some people that have autism can struggle to pick up social communications that aren't explicitly written down. You know, we don't grow up with a rule book of this is how you socialize. We learn that based on the environments that we're in, the people that we speak to, who we spend time with. But for people with autism, if some of their symptoms can be that they find that quite difficult actually, and instead they would need an explicit rule book. So there's a whole kind of range of symptoms that it comes under. But to answer the second part of your question, how can it be really useful? There's a few ways actually that can be really useful. So one thing is that people that have autism tend to tell it like it is, partially because of what I just described about how maybe they haven't learned all the rules of socialization, which means that they're going to be honest with you. And there's real value in talking to someone who doesn't mess you around. They're very honest, they're very clear about what they mean. They also often have special interests. So that for someone with autism, a special interest is something that really sucks them in and they love learning about it. It tends to be something that's very long-standing across the majority of their life. And they are passionate about this in a way that goes beyond kind of typical, oh, I'm really passionate about this topic. They learn a lot about it. So if you have someone who's autistic and you put them in an area where they can work with their special interest, maybe their special interest is programming, and so you hire them as a programmer, you're going to get someone who is incredibly knowledgeable, incredibly hardworking, incredibly upfront about what they mean and what they say, and can, you know, blow productivity out of the water because they're in the place that is their happy place, right? Something they're super, super interested in, and that's where they're working.
Yeah, I think words sometimes can be misleading, even if they're given a scientific sense. I think, yeah, that we live in a complex world. Bottom line, you know, I do really well on this podcast and interviewing folks, generally speaking, but in real life, it's a bit weirder for me to meet with people physically. Not that I don't do well, but yeah, crowds and noise, I stay away from that. When it comes to meeting strangers in my wife's family, for example, I don't like shaking hands and all of that. So quite particular. Now the question is it like on purpose, or did I build myself that way? I think it's more of the latter, but it's, yeah, and I get quite hyper focused in everything that I do. Same for this podcast. I'm being all in right now. Talking about you now, what are your next 3 goals that you want to accomplish for the rest of this year?
Oh, great question. So for the data business, we obviously want to grow. We're very early stage right now, and we're looking to grow quickly and build out our team and build out our product offering. We only launched in April, so we're all go on the growth aspect there of building out that business. On my coaching business side, I have lots of big goals for where I'd like this to go, but one of the things that I really want to build out for this year is my individual one-on-one leadership and entrepreneurship coaching. So that's working with a group of people individually, having a roster of people that I work with individually to grow their career and their leadership to the next level. And for me, that's super rewarding. And that also lays a foundation out to where I'd like to go beyond that, which is working with managers of people that are neurodivergent, working with teams that contain people that are neurodivergent. And instead of viewing the person in front of me as someone who needs to, the neurodivergent person as someone who needs to do the work, let's acknowledge that actually everyone needs to do a little bit of work if we want to get the best out of the individuals that we have. So my goal for the coaching business is to grow out that individual one-on-one coaching and begin spreading that out to people in the orbit of neurodivergence, if not neurodivergent themselves. My other goal is oh, go on.
Yeah, no, finish the goal part.
Okay. My other goal is on a personal one. So I mentioned earlier that I'm a musician, and that's one of my favorite things to do. So my other one is I started cello 6.5 years ago. And so I'm really looking to push that, become the best cellist that I can be, and get to the point where I'm much more comfortable with where I am on the instrument. So I like having the diversity of different goals that move separately, and I can work on whichever one of those is taking my fancy on a particular day.
Right. And where can people find out more about you?
So I'm on LinkedIn, Leigh Collier. My coaching website is ttncoaching.com, where TTN stands for Through the Noise. We haven't launched our website yet for 411 data, but that's up and coming. And then I'm on the social medias as well. So you can find me mainly through the coaching account. Is set up on most of the social medias, but personally, you can find me on LinkedIn.
Love it. And I am Charles Cormier, your host. You can find us at ceowisdompodcast.com or founderwisdompodcast.com. That was Leigh Collier.